What's up? Welcome into the Picks Four Polls podcast, brought to you by Bear Report as well as Blue Wire Pods. I'm your host, Usayd Koshul. Joining me today is actually Rashab Sikri, aka The Windy City Productions. Everyone knows him. He probably ended up winning Bears Twitter March Madness, but there's a lot of Bears talk going on. You know, the NFL never sleeps. We got baseball's opening day going on too. Cubs got their day one victory. There's apparently a lot of booze in Houston right now as the White Sox and Astros get ready to kind of start their seasons. But how's it going? Thanks for being on. And I think, quite frankly, you and I doing these recordings has become like a tradition because we do them at least 3 to 4 times a year, and they always create some really fun conversation.
100%, man. I mean, I have to get you on my draft reaction or live stream, which I'll be doing in a few months, or not even a few months. The draft is like next month. So if you want to come on again, he's been on my podcast, not my podcast, but my reaction stream the last like few years. We've had some pretty fun reactions, mostly in 2021 when we drafted Justin Fields. That was a pretty fun reaction. We got featured on a few like reaction compilations, I remember. So yeah, thanks for having me on again, man. It's going to be a fun time talking about the Bears.
It was, and I have the video saved somewhere because I've like tweeted it out a handful of times. I'm pretty sure it's still on my phone, but that 2021 reaction I think was legendary. because like our reactions were so completely different because you were like jumping up and down, and
you knew the pick before we actually made it. Like you saw on Twitter that we were about to select Justin Fields, so.
I mean, so part of it was I knew, like I saw on Twitter because people just like tweet things out. The other half of it is also that I had spent that off season so consumed in that the Bears were going to need a quarterback. And so when I was doing, my usual rounds, as I like to call them, I had been on ESPN. I had been on another good friend of mine, Keegan Hartman. I had been on Keegan's show too. And the talk that whole offseason for me, every time I made a guest appearance on a lot of these shows was, hey, what are the Bears going to do? And I think a week before the draft, I had said that at third overall, the 49ers were going to go either Mac Jones or Trey Lance. And that the entire time, knowing the connections the Bears had to Ohio State, it was inevitable at that point. And then the Sunday before the draft, I remember Ian Rappaport publicly saying for the 49ers, it's going to be either Mac Jones or Trey Lance. And that pretty much cemented in my mind. I knew it was going to be Fields. So for those of y'all wondering, I had the Fields pick on lock before anybody else did. But
yeah, he did.
Enough about 2021. Let's get into 2023 because we've had so many interactions on Twitter, and this offseason, quite frankly, Bears Twitter has been more interesting because it's been a much more exciting offseason. But thoughts, first impressions on the 2023 offseason, like what surprised you? What's something that you knew was going to happen? Because it's been a whirlwind of an offseason so far.
100%. Yeah, I'd say the most surprising thing is us not attacking the lines more, the defensive line, the offensive line. Even though we made a couple signings there, we added, DeMarcus Walker, we added Andrew Billings on the defensive line, we added Nate Davis on the offensive line. But I expected maybe a little bit more investment there just because it seemed like Ryan Poles was the type of GM that would start with the trenches first. But if you're going to draft the trenches, then it's not going to make that big of a difference, right? Like I would have personally liked to have the proven talent on the trenches, but we have so many draft opportunities coming up. We have pick number 9. We have multiple second round picks. We have a third round pick, and Ryan Poles found Braxton Jones, our starting left tackle, in the 5th round. So he clearly has an eye for scouting offensive line talent. Ian Cunningham does too, coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's the main surprise, I would say. And as for, my general reactions about the offseason, I think it's been a pretty good offseason for the Bears. Like I know a lot of people have not been maybe the happiest because they expected the Bears to spend all of their money. We still have $30 million to spend in cap space still. So we could have went after a higher price guy like Orlando Brown Jr. or like another guy like on the defensive line. Could have been an option for the Bears, but I'm not going to complain about them trying to go for the value guys and also trying to not overspend too much, right? Like they spent a lot on Tremaine Edmonds, about $20 million per year, but he's the caliber of player where you should be okay with spending that much on that player because he's already proven to be really good in the NFL. But like contrast that with like a Mike McGlinchey at right tackle where he's like, I call him like average, but if you have to spend 17, 18, 20 million on him, probably not the best use of your funds. So overall, Poles got a number one receiver in DJ Moore. He got O-line help in Nate Davis. He got really good linebackers. He got some other guys too. So I've been pretty happy about the offseason. It's still not even done yet, right? Like we still have the draft coming up. We still have potential trades coming up. The Bears do have a lot of cap space if they do want to, trade for a player that could be available that needs a new contract, like a Jeffrey Simmons, for example. So I've been pretty happy overall, though.
Yeah, you talk about a lot of value guys, and I mean, when you look at this free agency class, it's not one that blew anyone away. It's not like the Bears. So the Bears went into free agency after the DJ Moore trade with like $75 or $76 million in cap space. And again, they spent like half of that because they're sitting at 38, 39 million right now. But also, it's not like this free agency class, for the people that are disappointed, was one that was going to blow anyone away, because it just never seemed realistic. As much as people wanted to go out and, play mock GM on social media and say, oh, the Bears need to go ahead and sign Orlando Brown Jr. and then move him to left tackle, then look at Mike McGlinchey, and then look at Draymond Jones too. But really what it came down to was Ryan Poles, as well as just the various departments in the front office, saying, hey, what exactly is important for us? Because when you look at this class that's coming up here, and we'll get to the NFL draft the second half of the show, but what's so interesting is that that's where really, when it comes to addressing the trenches, that's where you do it. Like I've told people all off season, I've said this on this podcast as well, for the people that are annoyed in terms of not investing more in the trenches via free agency, I mean, the only thing you're really getting is experience. If you sign a guy like a Draymond Jones or a Mike McGlinchey in those hypothetical scenarios, of course, or Orlando Brown Jr. But the reality is the trenches are the foundation of your football team. So it's more valuable to draft a player, develop that player over the next 3 to 4 years, and have that cheap contract until 2025, 26, rather than it would be to kind of dish out a second contract for a 26, 27-year-old veteran. Because if you can get cheap offensive line play and cheap defensive line play, like the Eagles are a prime example of this. They have such cheap defensive line play, and it's just a factory that keeps on churning and the gift that keeps on giving.
100%. I mean, you mentioned it, the Eagles, they drafted most of their defensive linemen, even when they did need defensive line this year. Like Jordan Davis barely played for them, but he's going to be a major contributor probably next season because they lost some guys on the D line. And that's what other teams do too. Like the Chiefs have done that too. They've drafted defensive line pretty frequently. The Packers, other teams that have had pretty good defensive lines, you mostly build it through the NFL draft. So I totally agree. Like it's not going to be, we're probably not going to be kicking ourselves too much that we missed out on like a Mike McGlinchey or like a Draymond Jones in like 2 or 3 years, I would guess, because those players, kind of like you mentioned, they're not like the superstar level players where they were going to change the Bears immediately. They would have helped us out a lot this year for sure, but it's not going to turn around our entire franchise just from having those 2 players in here. So I think that Ryan Poles going through the NFL draft for this, it is the best approach long term.
And plus, I'll add this in before we talk about the new wide receiver one, DJ Moore, is that the Bears had such little talent last year that you could argue whatever the Bears decided to bring in this offseason is quite frankly an upgrade over anything that the Bears trotted out last year. Like the only position that you can say was not really upgraded was because the best on the roster is quarterback. Running back, you could argue there's been a bit of a slight downgrade there, but other than that, like the Bears went into this thing upgrading pretty much every single position.
Yeah, I mean, even the small upgrades too, like Andrew Billings, one technique nose tackle. It's not going to like change our entire defensive line by himself, but he's still an upgrade over whoever we had last year. I can't even remember right now. Like we did not have good production on the D line from the interior last year. So getting a guy, getting multiple guys that have had pretty good 1-year stints or 2-year stints with other teams, that's kind of how you build, cheap depth, right? And that's something that even Ryan Pace sometimes did, right? Like he's found Akeem Hicks on a cheap contract after his time with the Saints. turned out to be a steal of a deal because he had one good year with the Saints. He came over to the Chicago Bears, broke out there. So you never know with these value signings. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. Last year it didn't really work out because we didn't really go after many of them. Like we signed like the Byron Pringles and the Equinemius St. Browns of the world, but we didn't like necessarily go after maybe like the next tier of value signing. But I think this year we kind of did, right? Like we signed multiple guys like a Robert Tonyan at tight end, like Andrew Billings, like a DeMarcus Walker, who's not really a value signing, but he's like maybe a more expensive version of like an Al-Qadim Muhammad, where he had, one good season with the Titans, still on the upswing of his career. Hope to see more of that in the future. So, yeah.
Let's get into DJ Moore, because when the Bears made the trade, so it's one of those where you kind of just remember where you were and what you were doing at the time. I remember being at Starbucks when the news broke. Can also recount where I was when the Trubisky trade happened, as well as the Khalil Mack trade. But so the DJ Moore trade, I thought, blew a lot of people away. And it wasn't just the fact that the Bears wanting to trade out a first overall was the NFL's worst kept secret, because, I mean, the news broke Monday of the Combine that the Bears were going to trade out a first overall, and like 2 weeks later it actually happens. But were you surprised the Bears were able to get DJ Moore instead of a 2025 first round pick?
Yeah, 100%. I did not think that he was going to be available in this trade, because from the Carolina Panthers perspective, why would you trade your only really good talent on the roster receiver, right? Like, I know they added some guys now in free agency, like Adam Thielen, like a DJ Chark, but still, like, DJ Moore is a true number one. Like, he's proven it the last 4 or 5 years of his career with even bad quarterback play. So I thought that if they're going to trade up to number one, why would you put your quarterback in a bad situation by trading away, the number one option for that guy? But clearly they had to outbid other teams. They had to give their best offer. And, it was reported that Ryan Poles gave them the option between, I think, DJ Moore, JC Horn, maybe Brian Burns too might have been included. Like, he wanted like a sweetener in that deal to get it done immediately, and they threw in DJ Moore, which great for the Bears, because I did not think there was any other way to get like a true number one this year, besides maybe doing a trade or praying for somebody in the draft like a Jackson Smith-Njigba to break out for you in year one. But I definitely prefer getting a proven guy like DJ Moore. So I was really, really happy to get DJ Moore, and also to get other picks on top of that too, right? Like, we got 2025 second round pick. We got the first this year, obviously. We got a second round extra one this year. We got their first two in 2024, which could be potentially high, right? I mean, the Panthers, they're going to be starting a rookie quarterback. And as we Bears fans know, rookie quarterbacks generally do not do that well in the first year, the first couple years. So really, really happy with the haul that the Bears got, 100%.
See, I likened it to a guy like DJ Moore is more valuable than a first round pick in 2025, simply because you don't know what the draft class in 2025 is going to look like. And just having that veteran experience with a player like DJ Moore makes all the difference in the world. And when I go back and I look at a lot of scouting reports from the 2018 draft, my own included, I mean, DJ Moore was one of those guys that you looked at as low risk, high reward type player. And what I mean by that is that 2018 class, I think so many people forget it was stacked. You had guys like Calvin Ridley, Anthony Miller, DJ Moore even. And I think that when we look at that class in general, like, the two top guys are Ridley and DJ Moore. So that was a trade. When I saw that the Bears were able to land DJ Moore, I was ecstatic about it, because it just kind of reinforced how much Ryan Poles is setting the trends here in Chicago. And what I mean by that is that when you go back and look at the numbers, the Bears had $120 million invested on defense by the previous regime. Now, this regime, things are so different. They have such a different style of thinking that, yeah, they're going to invest in defense with their guys like a Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, but also, hey, DJ Moore, getting him at like 16, 17 million a year for like the next 3 to 4 years, which is pretty much when your window is before you have to pay Justin Fields, I mean, makes the most sense on the planet. Speaking of the defense, though, I mean, impressions of Tremaine Edmonds, because some people love it, some people hate it, some people say he's Brian Urlacher light. He's certainly a better fit at Mike linebacker than Roquan Smith was. But what does Matt Eberflus have to do to unlock his potential to take him from being a great linebacker to an elite linebacker?
Yeah, I mean, I think just surround him with the talent that he had maybe in like Buffalo, right? And even Buffalo, like I know they had a good defensive line, but Tremaine Edmonds last year, he broke out for them, right? Like he had the best year of his career. He's only 24, I believe, or 25, I think. So I think just from like the natural progression of his career, like from getting more experience, from getting more playing time, he's going to get better 100% because he was one of the youngest, most raw prospects coming out of, don't even remember what college he came from, but he was drafted at 19, right? So had a lot of growing to do, had a lot of learning to do. He's learned a lot in his last years of his career, gotten better in coverage, gotten better in terms of just being more instinctive, I guess. And Eberflus has shown that he can work with these linebackers, right? Like he turned Jack Sanborn into being pretty good with the Colts. He had guys like Darius or Shaquille Leonard now. Bobby Okereke did pretty good with him too. So I think the system overall it's it's very linebacker like. I don't want to say friendly, but it gets a lot of production out of the linebackers most of the times, right? And Tremaine Edmonds, being the athletic freak that he is, the ability to go sideline to sideline, explode up and down the field, the range that he has, right? Like he has a range that, like you mentioned, like a Brian Urlacher has. And I'm not trying to say that he's gonna be Urlacher because that's a lofty comparison to put on him, but he has these gifts that you just don't see in many linebackers. So I was pretty happy with the signing, right? Like it's definitely a lot. Like 18 million is a lot to spend on like an off-ball linebacker, but we have so much money right now. It's not like a terrible deal, I would say. It's probably like market value for him, and I was totally okay with it. Like especially after you got the steal in TJ Edwards, right? Like TJ Edwards, you're barely paying him any money at all for the pretty good time he had with the Eagles. So I'm totally okay with splurging a little bit on an elite type of linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, and if we're going to be honest, Devin White's going to get paid soon by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he'll reset the market and kind of get that $22-23 million a year that a lot of these off-ball linebackers want to seek. But sticking with the linebacker conversation here, you, I think, have this new trio of Edmonds, TJ Edwards, as well as Jack Sanborn. 2 of your 3 guys are on uber cheap deals. What do you think's the expectation for these guys? Because wherever Matt Eberflus has gone, you look at his time in Dallas with players like Sean Lee, for example, who, again, if I'm looking at Matt Eberflus's history and the way that this defense is coordinated, it's very clear that, like, you expect a guy such as Tremaine Edmonds to basically be Sean Lee in this defense. And Sean Lee, by the way, really solid player. But also, getting back to it, I mean, what are your expectations for these 3 guys? Because the Bears are going to do a lot of shuffling. You know, Edmonds is going to be the mic. That leaves Will and Sam for Edwards as well as Sanborn. What do you think is going to happen?
It's going to be a lot of production for sure. Like you're expecting a lot of tackles, obviously. We're going to be in nickel a lot too. I mean, all teams are in nickel nowadays. So it's not like all 3 linebackers are going to be on the field at all times, but you would expect, at least 2 to be on the field. And shuffling between Sanborn, Edwards, and Edmonds, I mean, that's a nasty linebacking core where you're not going to really have a break if you're the opposing offense, right? Like you have multiple guys that are good at tackling, good at run defense. A Sanborn, TJ Edwards. You have a guy that's a better coverage linebacker in a Tremaine Edmonds, who's more of the athletic freak too, that actually has the ability to go sideline to sideline. So I'm expecting a lot of production, and I think that this is going to help out our coverage a lot too. Like I know we didn't address the D line too much, but getting these linebackers that can cover, that can also play against the run, that is going to help out our run defense to some extent, right? Even if the defensive line is not totally fixed, because these are guys that can get to the ball carrier, crash those holes and get the ball carrier down. Okay, they've done that before in their time with the Philadelphia Eagles, with other teams too. So I'm expecting it to be a pretty good linebacking core. It should be I would say top 5, hopefully in the NFL, top 7 with how much talent we have right now, how much young talent we have.
So does the uncertainty at right tackle frustrate you at all? Because a lot of people are locking on to, let's just move Braxton Jones over to the right side, take a left tackle. The Bears do have their options, though, because you've got Larry Borom and Alex Leatherwood. Based on the way last season went, I mean, Larry Borum in and out of the lineup. We really didn't see a whole lot of Alex Leatherwood. But then again, Alex is a former first round pick going into year 3. So if I had to be a betting man, I would definitely say roll with Alex Leatherwood over Larry Borum.
I think I'd agree, but I also think we're definitely going to draft a right tackle. I think it's basically guaranteed we're going to get a right tackle somewhere in the draft. I'm thinking probably pick number 9 makes the most sense because then you have the pick of the litter, basically, right? Like I think that most of the tackles are going to be on the board at pick number 9, but I would have liked to see us maybe go after one in free agency because there were guys out there that were scheme fits, like Caleb McGarry. I thought was a scheme fit. Mike McGlinchey. But he got overpaid, so like he got so much money where I'm not gonna hold that against Ryan Poles for not getting McGlinchey. But I feel like Caleb McGarry, at least from the outside looking in, could have been a pretty good investment. But like I mentioned, though, like the draft is still there, and you have really good prospects like a Paris Johnson Jr. You know, other guys. You have the guy from Georgia. You have Darnell Wright as well. So I think that right tackle is going to be fixed in the NFL draft. It's obviously not the best to rely on a rookie to, perform really well for you in year 1, which we're going to need because we need a good offensive line for Justin Fields next year. But we had limited resources, right? Like I know maybe not limited is the word, but like you obviously can't spend everything. You can't spend all your money in 1 year. So going through the NFL draft for the tackle, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Bears, especially with how good the talent is in the NFL draft at tackle.
See, for me, one of the things that brings about so much uncertainty when it comes to this offensive line is you kind of know what you have in Tevin Jenkins, Braxton Jones. There's a lot of room to improve. You know what you have in Cody Whitehair. And I still think Tevin can be better, but something that worries me, and we're going to have this conversation after the draft too, especially in the dog days of late May, early June, going into the early portions of July until training camp. And it's going to be the biggest storyline to monitor throughout training camp, as well as reshuffling the offensive line. Because Ryan Poles has kind of indicated, hey, we are willing to find the best 5 up front. It's not necessarily something where we have a set combination right now. You throw Nate Davis into the mix at right guard, and now you're in a situation where it's almost as if, what does your interior look like? Going to be Jenkins at left guard, Whitehair at center, Nate Davis at right guard, which I think is a pretty solid interior. But then that brings into question, what do you do when you draft a guy in the first round? Where do you kick Braxton Jones out? And I think the lack of continuity, I mean, there's continuity along the offensive line, but the Bears don't have a solid starting 5, is a bit worrisome, especially because this team is banking on Justin breaking out in 2023. And one of the big ways to do that is to have a level of continuity along the OL.
Yeah, definitely. But it's also like the start of a rebuild, right? Like we started rebuilding basically last year. So like I guess you can't expect too much continuity when you're still trying to get the right pieces on the O-line. And that's not always going to be just fixed in 1 year. Sometimes it takes multiple years to get the right pieces on the O-line. And Ryan Poles, he's been put in this really tough position where you obviously want a breakout year for Fields next year, but you're still trying to build this roster for the long term the right way, like through the NFL draft. And it's obviously unfortunate that you're gonna have to maybe shuffle some guys around, but I feel like the talent level is there, right? Like a Nate Davis, he's probably sticking on right guard, but if you look at Tevin Jenkins, I mean, he's proven to already do really good in the switch last year. Like he was playing tackle in college, he moved to guard, did really well at guard. I know there's a learning curve going from right guard to left guard, but it's probably not going to be as big of a curve, I would hope, as going from tackle to guard. I know you're switching sides, but it is what it is. Like I guess you can't really complain about it too much because it's just the cards that Ryan Poles was dealt with. Like he can't fix everything. He can't keep everything the same from year to year. There's a lot that's going to need change for sure.
Every team's certainly different. Players tend to change and adapt as well. Part of change is continuing to grow. What does a breakout season for Justin Fields look like in 2023 to you? Because and I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to say he needs to have this kind of Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes type season. but I think a sizable step forward where you just see consistency throughout all 17 games, and he's the reason the Bears are winning with this revamp roster around him is within itself a breakout season. And in that, I would include something such as Justin going ahead and possibly even leading this team to contention for a playoff spot or a wild card appearance.
Yeah, thank you for asking in terms of stats. At least like 3,000 passing yards, hopefully 3,500 plus, 4,000 plus would be amazing. We've never had a 4,000 yard passer still after like freaking like 70 plus years of being a franchise, but I'm not going to put that expectation on him because we still have, holes to fix on the offense, but we obviously cannot be the worst passing offense in the NFL next year. Like if we are still the worst passing offense and Justin Fields sadly is not going to be on the roster in 2024. So we need to see sizable jumps in terms of the passing ability, the passing production too, because now you actually have a true number one. You have a pretty good receiving core now, probably the best in the NFC North, I would say, if you look at the entire depth of the receiving core. So I would hope like at least 3,200, 3,300 passing yards. The running is going to be less, I would say, next year because he's going to be trying to pass in the pocket more, not just take off every time the pocket collapses. But like you mentioned, also like winning games and putting the Bears in positions to win games and just growing overall from last year. Like if you look at the film, if he's growing from last year in terms of, recognizing more coverages faster, getting the ball out quicker, hitting the easy passes faster, like a screen pass, like if he's accurate on the screen passes, if he's hitting those, consistently next year, that in itself would be an upgrade, right? Because last year you saw, some of the short passes, he was not able to really convert them consistently for whatever reason, mechanical change, whatever it was. So there's a lot of ways you could look at classifying a breakout year for Fields, but I think that stats wise and numbers wise and the winning percentage wise, if he's just growing in every category, that would probably be a breakout year for Justin Fields.
All right, let's talk the Bears 2022 draft class. They had, I think, 9 or 10 picks. I mean, which player's breaking out next year in your opinion? Because for me, I mean, the easy answers are either Jaquan Brisker or Braxton Jones. I think Dominique Robinson, based on what I saw last season and then just watching him as a rookie in training camp, there was a lot there that you looked at and said, all right, he's got a serious chance to break out. But who's breaking out from the Bears 2022 draft class and taking that sophomore jump?
All right, I'll try not to say Braxton Jones and Jaquan Brisker because you already talked about them, but Kyler Gordon, I mean, why not? I mean, I know he had a very rough start to his career with the Bears. The most picked on cornerback for the first like 6-7 weeks of the season. Did really bad at the beginning, but you saw down the stretch of last year, he actually put together some pretty good performances like in a row. Like the last 4 or 5 games, he looked pretty decent in a lot of the games. He had a couple picks. He picked off Josh Allen. So he got his hands on the ball. He already has, I think, more interceptions than Jalen Johnson has ever had in his career. I know Jalen seems to not get his hands on the ball that often. So I think that Kyler Gordon, with his, his ability to be athletic, his ability to play outside and inside, hopefully next year he can stick more in one side, right? If we draft a cornerback to play outside, then maybe Kyler Gordon can be full-time nickel. Or if we draft a nickel cornerback, then maybe Kyler Gordon could be full-time outside cornerback. Maybe that would help his development out a little bit more. But you just saw like a lot of good things out of Kyler Gordon last year where you would expect that to continue to, get better next year. And he's only like 22, 23, right? So the sky's the limit still for Kyler Gordon. Ryan Pohl's first pick ever with the Chicago Bears. So I'd say Kyler Gordon. And then besides that, I can't really think of any other guys that would be given many opportunities to start. Like all the offensive linemen we picked, they're probably not going to get many chances. Like a Doug Kramer, like a Jatari Carter, like maybe they're going to be camp bodies, but I don't think they're going to actually get the chance to start next year, barring like injury or something crazy.
So 4 picks in the top 100 for the first time since 2008. What's your overall impression of this class? Because it's a class where the Bears, like I said, they've got 4 picks in the top 100 for the first time in like 13 or 14 years. There's a lot of maneuvering that can be done. And then I see it as a very top-heavy class, but there's so much value in rounds 2 and 3. It's almost like Ryan Pohl's, you cannot screw this up by any means.
Yeah, and with how many needs the Bears still have on both the lines, like we're basically guaranteed to get a day one contributor on day one and day two, right? Like whoever we pick in number 9, he's probably going to be starting day one. Same with both our second round picks and the edge class, and also the maybe like the center class. I'd say those are really really deep this year, right? Like you have multiple centers that are high caliber players that could turn out to be high caliber players. And usually you don't get that. So if the Bears want to take a swing on like a John Michael Schmitz or a Luke Whippler or Olu from Michigan, like there's a lot of guys you could take a swing on in this draft at center. And then edge too, like you saw, they ran crazy times in the 40-yard dash, at the combine. Like these are some of the most athletic edge prospects we've seen in a long, long time in the NFL draft. Okay, it's not only Will Anderson, it's guys like Nolan Smith, Isaiah Foskey, it's other guys out there too. Like there's just so many names I can think of where any of these players would probably be a day one upgrade for the Chicago Bears. So I think that the line depth is definitely good enough where the Bears should be getting a big upgrade. And then, beside, if you look at the other positions, like there's decent cornerbacks too. There's decent running backs too. Like if you want to take a running back in round 4, round 5, like a Chase Brown from Illinois, I'm a big fan of because I'm an Illinois fan, obviously. But there's also other guys like a Zach Charbonnet or a lot of other guys where if you want to still get a running back to add to this tandem that we have between Herbert and Foreman, you could do that too to get another really solid running back. So whatever the case is, I think the Bears will be adding a lot of talent in the draft, no matter what. Like it's really hard to mess this up, I would say.
Let's play some scenario-based games here. I mean, what are you doing at 9th overall? Because the easy consensus is offensive lineman, but then there's also the rumors we hear of the Titans possibly trading up for a quarterback, and then you also hear Jalen Carter, and it sounds like, see, it's weird because we don't know, like if Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were still here, Jalen Carter would probably be off the Bears draft board because that regime did not necessarily pick players who got into trouble off the field. Ryan Poles has kind of made indications of, well, I need Kevin Warren and George McCaskey to sign off. But what are the Bears doing at 9th overall if you were in Ryan Poles' chair?
I'd go O-line 100%. I think I'm on the record saying this, that the Bears need offensive line right now. We need to protect Justin Fields. That's the biggest priority for next year, being able to protect our franchise quarterback. But I would also not be too mad at going cornerback, potentially, like getting a Devin Witherspoon, getting a Christian Gonzalez, because I know that secondary is not the biggest need in the world, right? Like I know a lot of Bears fans probably not going to be the happiest if we do select cornerback, but if you look at the prospects that Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez are, they're really, really good prospects. Like they could actually be number 1 corners for like a long time for you. So if you don't re-sign Jalen Johnson next year, or even if you just want a better cornerback number 2, those could be elite high-end level prospects. And Ryan Poles has said that he's willing to draft best player available, right? So it doesn't have to be an offensive lineman. It could also be a receiver like a JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba from Ohio State, which I know a lot of Bears fans are pretty high on because he has the connection with Fields. Not so much. He only played a few games with Fields, but those Ohio State receivers are really doing well in the NFL now. So that could also be an option. But if you ask me, I just go offensive line. I go Paris Johnson Jr., Broderick Jones, either of those two. Not the biggest fan, I'd say, of Peter Skoronski, just because I think a lot of people think he's a guard, right? So like if you want to draft a guard that high, I don't think it would make sense when the Bears already have 3 players or 4 players that can play guard right now for them. So I'd go one of the tackles, but we'll see what Ryan Poles does. It's hard to get a guess on what he's going to do because last year I thought it was 100% certain he's going to go O-line or receiver at pick number 39. He went cornerback and then safety, so it's kind of hard to guess with this guy.
Last year was a unique year because there's a run on wide receivers in the back half of round 1. And then the AJ Brown to Philadelphia trade threw so many things into flux. And then you had the run on players from Georgia too, because the Packers, I think, took 2 Georgia players. So what that did was push guys like Gordon and Brisker, who, again, should have been first round picks last year, all the way down the board. And if people want my comparison for Jaquan Brisker, he has the potential to be a guy like the floor of a player like Keanu Neal, but the ceiling of a player like a Minkah Fitzpatrick or James Derwin, who are pretty solid when I look at it. But let's play, scenario-based games again. And before we get into our next scenario, I agree. I think it's got to be O-line and specifically offensive tackle. Like, you don't draft a right tackle within the top 10. If you look at historically all the players that have kind of been drafted in the first round, like a Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, I'll throw Elijah Vera Tucker in there as well to the New York Jets a couple of years ago. Pretty sure I just mentioned, Rashawn Slater too. They've all been guys that have been left tackles. Tristan Wirfs from Iowa as well. But what are the Bears doing in rounds 2 and 3 here? Because to me, it's going to be edge rusher and offensive line most likely again for the we need another wide receiver crowd. I think round 2 is where you go trenches. Round 3 is where you kind of add a playmaker.
I agree. Yeah, if you look at the edge depth, like I kind of talked about already, there's going to be guys on the board at pick number, whatever our pick is. We have 2 end of the second round picks. There's going to be guys available at the edge spot that could be very helpful, or even like a defensive tackle, like a Keanu Benton could be a fantastic pick for the Bears, right? He has athleticism. He has that ability to maybe play 3 technique if you can mold him into that, being that. So I do agree it's probably going to be, D-line, it's going to be edge, but I also think that Ryan Poles is going to be going best player available. So if there is let's say like a Jahmyr Gibbs somehow falls down to you at pick in the 50s, I think Ryan Poles would maybe take him, right? He's the level of prospect that I think it would be okay with taking. I know we don't need running back, but he's kind of similar to Bijan Robinson, where he's that good of an overall player where you might consider it. Because I'm just thinking that Ryan Poles is going to go best player available, right? And if he's going that way, then that could be the way he goes about doing this. But otherwise, I would say defensive line for sure. Offensive line could be a big help, and receiver probably is going to be later on, because I can't think of, unless like a Quentin Johnson somehow falls that far, probably not. But I definitely think it's going to be defensive line.
Just saying, the first 4 picks in anyone's Bears mock draft over the next 4 weeks should include only SEC and Big Ten prospects, because that's legitimately where it seems like all the talent is. All right, how about day 3? What do you think Ryan Poles' biggest goal needs to be on day 3? Because it's not just about adding depth. The Bears found Braxton Jones last year in the 5th round. The Bears got Dominique Robinson too in round 5, who, again, I think has a lot of potential. So having, I think it's like 2 5th-round picks, 1 6th-rounder, and a couple 7th-rounders, there's a lot of potential there to add some talent that can be quality depth for you.
Yeah, and you can just select best player available there. Like if you already got an edge, you got an offensive tackle, you got the center in day 1, day 2, then you can just go best player available. So if you have another edge that falls to you, great, go for him. If you have, a cornerback that falls to you, go with him, or get a running back, whatever you need, right? Like it's going to be BPA at that point, and the Bears, again, having so many needs and needing depth on the roster, there's going to be a lot of guys available that could be pretty big upgrades for the Bears in terms of like a depth point of view. And it's a lottery, right? Like the more lottery tickets you have, the higher chance you have of hitting it big and getting a steal in like a round 5 or like a round 6. So I will say also that they could also go quarterback on day 3, because even though I know we re-signed Nathan Peterman today, we got PJ Walker too. We have Justin Fields, obviously. But if Ryan Poles does want to get a developmental project at quarterback, which Ryan Pace seemed to never really do. I know we had Tyler Bray for a while, but we didn't really draft quarterbacks that often. So if some quarterback falls to you on day 3 in like a round 6, round 7, why not draft him, right? Like it's the flyer that you have. And we saw last year, like a Brock Purdy did really well for the 49ers unexpectedly. That's not always going to happen, but you have to take the swings for that to potentially happen. So I think quarterback could be on the board for the Bears as well on day 3.
I was just going to say, as you were speaking there, like just use a 49ers model where you get a guy like a Nick Mullins, undrafted free agent, CJ Beathard to draft him, and then all of a sudden Brock Purdy bursts onto the scene. But all right, let's talk general offseason thoughts here. There's so much going on. Outside of the Aaron Rodgers drama, like what key storylines have you been following?
Definitely draft stuff. Obviously, like looking at what teams are going to draft, which players. Keeping a track of the mock drafts has been pretty big. But otherwise, like there probably hasn't been too much other noise. Like I can't think of any major offseason stories besides Aaron Rodgers, which he has the spotlight basically every year now for the past 3 years. He's had the spotlight on him. He's finally getting traded now, I think, right? Like he's not officially traded, but the Jets and the Packers are coming to terms on an agreement probably soon. So we'll see what happens with that. But otherwise, it has been a pretty chill offseason. Like there have not been too many like trade requests or anything. Like last year, we saw so many players get traded, like some stars like a Devontae Adams. So I'm kind of like waiting to see if the trade requests are going to come from people that need contracts, like a DeForest Buckner or like a Jeffrey Simmons. Their contracts are running out next year, both of them, according to my knowledge. So with the Bears having the ability to take on a new contract and still trade draft capital for a player, that's something the Bears could entertain doing, because now we're in position to do that this year when we weren't in position to do that last year. So keep an eye out for like people that could be demanding trades, but right now it has been pretty quiet, I would say, for the most part.
The one that intrigues me the most is Darren Waller being traded from Las Vegas to the New York Giants. And I say that simply because if you watched the Giants last year, you saw a team that was a carbon copy of the 2018 Bears. Really good defense led by a veteran defensive coordinator with a stud pass rusher in Kayvon Thibodeau. An offense that had some talent, but not a lot of talent. And then a quarterback who finally seemingly figured it out, but was more of a product of scheme and a coach hiding his tendencies in Daniel Jones. That you go out and you trade for Darren Waller, and then you recommit to Daniel Jones to kind of show that, hey, we still believe Daniel can be the guy moving forward. But let's talk Lions, Packers, and Vikings. I mean, what do you expect those three teams to do in round one? Because the Lions are scary. They've got a top 10 pick here. The Packers don't have a top 10 pick, but they're facing so much uncertainty. And then the Vikings are in the midst of this like competitive rebuild where they've let a lot of their core veterans go and they're ready to restart all over. So what do you think those three teams do in round one?
Yeah, Lions, it's kind of tough to say because they have 2 first-round picks. They don't have many needs, I would say, right? Like they have a pretty good roster right now, which is crazy to say as a Bears fan, but the Lions actually have a pretty good roster. So they could actually go best player available. Probably add to the defense. They did not have a good defense last year. They added a lot of players this year, but they could probably still use some defensive line help. So maybe like a Jalen Carter, if he falls to the Lions at pick number 6, I think that could make a lot of sense. They could fit him into the culture that they have there and kind of protect him, build around him, and hopefully, have him avoid off the field issues. But I also think the Lions could be maybe like a sneaky team to get a quarterback, because I know that Jared Goff did pretty well last year, but you can't bank on that continuing forever, right? Like Jared Goff, he's already reached his ceiling at this point. He's getting a little bit older. He's not going to be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. So if you want to take a swing on like Anthony Richardson or like a Will Levis, bank on the physical traits, have them develop behind Jared Goff for the next year or two. I think that can make a lot of sense as well for the Lions. And I actually think that would be the smart move for the Lions, because you're not going to be drafting this high probably ever again. If this rebuild works out well, like at least in the next 2 or 3 years, you're not going to be drafting this high in the draft. So I think it would make sense for the Lions to at least entertain going quarterback. But looking at the Packers then, they could use a receiver for sure. Like they only have Christian Watson really as the only, high upside guy right now. They got rid of Alan Lazard. They got rid of Randall Cobb too, I believe. So they could use a receiver like maybe a Jackson Smith-Njigba, maybe a Quentin Johnson. But the Packers also historically have not drafted a receiver in the first round. So they could be a threat to go for edge, defensive line, offensive line like they usually do. And then looking at the Vikings, they have defensive needs for sure. So cornerback potentially, defensive line could be on the board. They're picking at the end of round 1, so they're not going to have like a high caliber player probably fall to them like a blue chip guy, but they could still get a guy that could help them out next year 100%. But if you want to look at like the division if you want to like predict the standings for next year, right? Like I think the Lions are probably going to finish in first. I'm just being 100% unbiased because they have the best roster in the North by far right now, right? Like they have the best offensive line. They have a pretty good defense now too. Like in terms of like the secondary, they have Kirby Joseph. They have other guys that they added this year. Aiden Hutchinson too. The only question mark I have with the Lions is Jared Goff going to hold them back, which is a possibility because we've seen Jared Goff not do well, some years. But if he does have the proper supporting cast around him, he's probably not going to like prevent you from going to the playoffs. But it's the Lions, okay? So we can never be sure about them being good ever because they have not been consistently good ever. So I think Lions number one. I want to say Bears number two, which is being a little bit optimistic, but with the Vikings probably taking a step back, and with the Packers losing Aaron Rodgers and us not knowing anything about Jordan Love, I think there's a good chance the Bears could be number two just because of Justin Fields, hopefully taking a leap next year and hopefully the defense being better as well next year. What do you think about the order next year? Like, what do you predict?
Well, I agree with you. And funny enough, talking about, what do you think the NFC North is going to look like in 2023 was my final question. But I mean, it's inevitable. You have a Lions team that's coming back that, again, their biggest move of the offseason was retaining Ben Johnson, who had gotten a handful of head coaching interviews. I mean, he put together, I think, a phenomenal showing as the offensive coordinator last year and really exceeded expectations. Dan Campbell's a guy who a lot of Bears fans don't like and just love to make fun of, but the significance about Detroit is that Detroit plays hard for Dan Campbell, and it's very clear that these are not your same old Lions, or at least that's not what we saw last year. Like, there's such a culture shift happening in Detroit right now. It would not be a surprise to see them be one of the top teams for the next couple of years. And then you look at the Bears. I mean, the thing with the Bears is this is young ascending team that is still figuring out who they are. They're still figuring out the identity. They have a lot of needs. The Bears are at least a year behind where the Lions are. Now, the only advantage the Bears have over the Lions in terms of an identity is the Bears have a long-term solution at quarterback. The Lions really do not. And then you look at the Vikings and Packers. Those are teams that are dealing with uncertainty. The Vikings are dealing with uncertainty simply because you don't know how much longer Minnesota can keep kicking the can down the road. Last year was about as good as it's going to get for Kirk Cousins and co. because they played really well, even though Minnesota was in a lot of one-score games. Kevin O'Connell's got a great relationship with Kirk Cousins. The Packers, I mean, it's the dawn of a new era. They still are going to have a solid defense. Offense, you expect there to be continuity, especially because it is a veteran offensive line. Christian Watson, I think, started off really slow last year, should certainly take a massive step forward, though. You look at players like Amari Rodgers, who again came on towards the middle of the year last year. And then last but not least, I mean, the big question there is Jordan Love. I think the Packers are going to have to change up their philosophy on offense because they're going to have to go more kind of run first than they traditionally want to. And that's simply because Jordan Love hasn't shown he's going to get acclimated to the speed of the NFL yet. And no disrespect to Jordan Love, he can be really good. But again, going into year 4, like he's only got one start and really haven't seen much of what he's been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Packers fans think that he's guaranteed to be a Hall of Famer now because they've done that twice in a row, but that's not how it works, right? Like, you have to be really lucky to find a quarterback that is a Hall of Fame level talent, or even like an average quarterback is so damn hard to find in the NFL. Like, even us Bears fans, like most years we have not had even average level quarterback plays. So expecting Jordan Love to be like a superstar right away it's not a good expectation for the Packers fan base, but the Packers fan base has been spoiled with all these quarterbacks, so I can't even blame them for having these high expectations for Jordan Love. But we'll see how the division turns out next year. It's going to be a lot of fun for sure.
Absolutely, it really is. Before we get out of here, tell us where people can kind of follow you on Twitter and keep up with your work.
Yeah, so if you look up the Windy City Productions on Google, you can find my YouTube channel. You can follow me on Twitter at DWC Prods. My personal account is at Rishabh Sikri, RSHABSIKRI, if you want to follow me. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I'll definitely have you on my channel as well for the NFL draft if you want to do that again.
Absolutely. That consider it an open invitation. You can come on here anytime you want to. Just go and text me. That's gonna do it for us, guys. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Usayd Koshul. Check out the Bear Report. Follow us on Twitter at Bear Report. Check out the Picks4 Polls account as well. That's at Picks4 Polls. We're on pretty much every single social media platform. Go to our website too. I just dropped the scouting report on Texas running back Bijan Robinson, breaking down potential fits in round 1 as well. That's going to do it from us, though. Until then, stay safe and warm if you're in the Chicagoland area. I know everyone's on spring break this week, but bear down, guys. We will see you next week when Andrew returns and we have another really cool guest on.